Welcome in, everyone. Today's deep dive is going to be, well, I think it's really powerful stuff. We're going to be looking at dealing with grief. And we found this awesome resource online from Listallion. It's 50 journal prompts, and they're all about processing loss. So think of it kind of like a toolkit for your heart.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it because journaling can be such a safe space to, really kind of explore all those complicated emotions that come with grief.
It's not about pretending it didn't happen.
Yeah,
Right?
it's not about erasing the pain. It's more about understanding it and honoring it and eventually moving through it.
And I think what's so cool about these prompts is that they're organized in a way that takes you through the different stages of grief. Like that first section, It's all about those raw early days after a loss, when it just feels so surreal, like you're just trying to function.
Right, and even really simple prompts in that section can be so powerful. Like there's one that just says, "What were your first emotions?" And it's like, whoa. It makes you stop and think about that initial shock and disbelief. It's like capturing those feelings before they fade.
Yeah, it's like taking a snapshot of your grief in that exact moment. And I've heard from so many people who've lost loved ones that they wish they had done more of that early on, just capturing those raw, unfiltered thoughts and feelings. Because later on, it's hard to remember what that initial wave felt like.
That's so true. And sometimes even if you don't feel like putting those emotions into words, just the act of writing itself can be therapeutic.
Right.
There's something about getting it out of your head and onto the page that helps us process those feelings.
Totally. And there's another prompt in that section that really got me. It says, reflect on the moment you found out. I can only imagine how tough that would be, but I can also see how important it could be to process that specific moment.
It's like confronting the reality of what happened head on. And Listallion actually includes this quote right after that section, and I think it's so powerful. It says, "Grief is not linear. Take each day as it comes, and remember that healing doesn't mean forgetting, but learning how to carry your memories with love." It's such a good reminder that there's no right or wrong way to grieve.
That's huge, right? We all handle grief differently, and there's no set timeline for healing. But one thing that's true for most people is that as that initial shock starts to fade, the grief often takes on new forms.
Yes, and it can be this mix of emotions that can be tough to navigate.
Oh, for sure.
And that's where that next section comes in, navigating the emotions of grief. This part really acknowledges that grief isn't just sadness, it's anger and loneliness and even those moments of laughter that can totally catch you off guard.
I've definitely had those. Like once when my grandmother passed away, I was at the grocery store and I burst into tears in the cereal aisle. I'm sure people thought I was crazy.
I'm sure they understood. I mean, grief doesn't exactly follow a schedule, right?
No, it can really ambush you.
And that's why these prompts about navigating all those emotions are so helpful. They give you a way to understand those feelings even when they feel confusing.
Like that one that asks, how do you handle sadness when it comes unexpectedly? It acknowledges that those moments are going to happen and encourages you to find healthy ways to cope.
Right, and there's another quote in this section that says, "Each emotion you feel is valid. Allow yourself to sit with them, acknowledge their presence, and release them when you're ready." It's such a good reminder that we don't have to bottle those emotions up. We can let them flow through us and then let them go.
It reminds me of something I heard once. You can't heal what you don't feel. It's all about leaning into those emotions and allowing ourselves to experience the full spectrum of grief.
Exactly. It's not about rushing through it. It's about being present with those feelings and trusting that they will subside.
But I think even when we're ready to let go, there's still this fear sometimes, right? Because letting go can feel like we're losing those memories,
Oh, absolutely.
those precious moments that we shared with our loved ones.
Right, and that's where the next section, finding comfort in memories, comes into play. It's really about honoring the past while also finding a way to move forward.
And what I love about these prompts is they recognize the power of memory. It can bring both joy and pain. Like there's one that says, describe a place that holds significance in your grief journey. It could be a park bench or a favorite restaurant or even just a room in your house that holds a special memory.
And even just revisiting those places can be a form of journaling in itself,
That's true.
You're interacting with those memories in a real, tangible way.
Yeah, it's like creating a physical connection to those memories.
Mm-hmm.
And I love how these prompts also encourage you to engage with memories in different ways, like writing down a favorite story about your loved one or describing a personal item that brings them to mind. It's like keeping those memories alive.
There's a quote here that says, "Even in the sorrow of loss, our memories offer comfort. Cherish those moments and let them remind you of the love that endures."
I love that. It's a reminder that even though our loved ones are physically gone, the love we shared is still there.
Exactly.
It's like a thread that connects us.
Yeah.
And as much as we need to honor the past, We also have to find a way to move forward. And that's where that next section, rediscovering purpose after loss, comes in. It can feel impossible at first, but these prompts offer a glimmer of hope.
Yeah, what I think is so great about this section is that it acknowledges that finding new meaning is a gradual process, you know?
Absolutely.
It's not about replacing what you've lost, but figuring out what life looks like now.
It's like the world has shifted,
Uh-huh.
and you have to figure out how to navigate this new reality.
Exactly. And these prompts encourage you to explore how your values, your priorities, maybe even your dreams have changed.
That prompt, how has your purpose changed since your loss, just hits hard. It acknowledges that grief can totally change who we are at our core.
And it reminds us that finding a new sense of purpose takes time. It's a journey.
It really is.
Yeah.
And one thing I appreciate about this section is that it doesn't shy away from the fact that even when we're grieving, there can still be moments of joy. You know, like that prompt that asks you to write about things that bring you joy even in the midst of sadness. Those little moments are so important because they remind us that our hearts can still experience happiness.
Right. And the quote from Listallion says, "In the wake of grief, purpose can feel distant, but it will return. Trust that in your healing you will find meaning once again." It's a message of hope.
It is. It's a reminder that even though the path ahead might be unclear, there's still light to be found. But that journey doesn't end there, does it?
Nope. There's still this whole piece about accepting the loss and moving forward. That's where that last section comes in, accepting and moving through grief.
Okay, so tell me more about that.
This part is about acknowledging that grief is ongoing. It's not about forgetting, but about integrating the loss into our lives in a healthy way.
I see. So it's not about erasing the past, but learning to live with it?
Exactly. And one of the prompts in this section that really stood out to me was, what does letting go mean to you? It's so personal, but also so universal.
Oh, yeah, because we all have to figure out what letting go looks like for us.
Right.
And there's no one right answer.
Right.
For some people, it might mean releasing anger or guilt. For others, it might be finding a way to honor their loved one's memory.
And the cool thing is just writing about letting go can actually bring you closer to acceptance. Putting those thoughts and feelings into words helps us make sense of them.
It's like we're creating our own narrative for our grief, a story that helps us understand the loss and where we fit in now.
And this last quote from Listallion is so fitting. It says, "Grief is not something to get over, but something to move through. With each step, you honor your emotions, your memories, and your path forward. Healing isn't a straight line. It's a journey."
That's a great way to put it. So we've covered a lot of ground here, but I think it's clear that these prompts are such a great starting point for exploring grief. What do you think makes them so effective?
You know what strikes me is that they approach grief holistically. They recognize the emotional, the practical, and even the spiritual sides of loss. It's done so thoughtfully.
It's like they've created a roadmap not to escape grief, but to actually navigate it.
Exactly. It's about learning and growing from the experience.
So we've unpacked these prompts, but how can our listeners actually use these tools? That's what we'll be digging into in part 2 of this deep dive. All right, so we spent some time with these 50 grief journal prompts from Listallion, and I would say I'm feeling pretty inspired.
Yeah.
But I know for a lot of people, the idea of journaling can be kind of intimidating. You
Yeah.
know? Like, where do you even start with something like this?
Oh, totally. It can feel really overwhelming to look at 50 prompts and think, okay, I have to do all of these.
Right.
But the good news is you absolutely don't. Think of it more like a buffet. You pick and choose what works for you.
I love that analogy. Okay, so how do we decide which prompts to start with? Do we just go with our gut, or is there some sort of strategy?
I think it's a little bit of both. But what's really neat about how Listallion put this together is they've organized these prompts into different categories that really reflect the stages of grief. So you can literally choose based on where you're at in your own journey.
So, like, if you're still in those early days after a loss, maybe you start with the processing the first days of loss prompts.
Exactly. Those prompts are all about acknowledging that initial shock and disbelief, those really raw emotions that can be so intense at the beginning.
And then as you start to move through those initial stages, you might find yourself drawn to prompts in the navigating the emotions of grief section. Because that's when things can get really complicated, right? It's not just sadness. It's this whole mix of emotions.
Yeah, it's like grief has its own weather patterns, you know? Sunny one minute, stormy the next, and you're trying to figure out what to wear.
Okay, I'm loving these weather analogies.
Yeah.
So let's say we found a prompt that really speaks to us. What are some tips for actually getting started with the writing? Because I know sometimes you sit down with a journal and you just stare at the blank page.
Oh, the blank page can be so scary. But honestly, there's no right or wrong way to journal. It's not about grammar or perfect sentences. It's about getting those thoughts and feelings out of your head.
So it's more about the process than the product.
Exactly. Some people like to set a timer for like 10 or 15 minutes and just free write whatever comes to mind. Others prefer to really take their time and think about each word, try different things and see what feels right for you.
I've heard that sometimes it helps to just start with a stream of consciousness. Just write down whatever pops into your head, even if it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, totally. And don't be afraid to think outside the box, too. If the words aren't coming, maybe try drawing or doodling or even writing a letter to your loved one. It's all about expressing those feelings in whatever way works for you.
And it's okay to take breaks.
Mm,
Like if a prompt is too much or you just feel stuck, step away for a bit and come back to it later.
for sure. Journaling shouldn't be another thing to stress about. And as you keep journaling, you might start to notice some patterns emerging. Maybe certain themes keep popping up, or you find yourself drawn to certain types of prompts. Those patterns can give you some really valuable insights into your grief journey.
It's like you're becoming your own grief detective.
Right. Uncovering clues about how you're processing everything.
And maybe you discover some inner strength you didn't even know you had.
Exactly. And remember, you don't have to share your writing with anyone. This is for you. It's a way to connect with yourself. But if you do feel comfortable sharing maybe with a therapist or a close friend, it can be a really powerful way to deepen those connections and build support.
That's so important. Because even when we're surrounded by people who care, sometimes grief can feel incredibly isolating. Sharing our writing can be a way to let people in and let them know what we're going through.
Yeah, and it can help to normalize the experience of grief because even though we all go through it at some point, it's still not something we talk about very openly.
It's true.
Yeah.
We need to talk about it more. The more we share our stories, the less alone we'll feel.
And you never know. By sharing your story, you might even inspire someone else to reach out for support.
Okay, so we've talked about choosing prompts, getting started with writing, and even the benefits of sharing. But what about those times when journaling just doesn't feel like enough? Like when the pain is so intense or the prompts just aren't resonating?
That's a really important point to bring up. Journaling is a fantastic tool, but it's not a cure-all, and it's definitely not a substitute for professional help. If you're really struggling to cope, please reach out for support, talk to a therapist, join a support group, or confide in someone you trust.
There's absolutely no shame in asking for help. In fact, it takes a lot of strength to do that. And remember, grief is a journey, not a destination. There will be good days and bad days. Just be patient with yourself, honor your emotions, and reach out to your support system when you need it.
That's so well said. So to wrap up this part of our deep dive, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from this?
If I could offer one piece of advice, it would be, don't be afraid to experiment. Try different prompts, different writing styles, and most importantly, be kind to yourself. There's no right way to grieve, and there's no timeline for healing.
I love that. So we've talked about why these grief journal prompts are so helpful and how to actually use them. Now it's up to you. What are you going to do with them?
Okay, so welcome back to our deep dive into these grief journal prompts from Listallion. We've talked about why they're so powerful, how to choose the right ones, and even some tips for getting started with the whole journaling thing. But now it's time to take it to the next level, actually putting pen to paper and seeing what happens.
This is where the real work begins. It's one thing to talk about journaling, but it's a whole other experience to really feel its power.
So let's say our listener is sitting down with their journal, they picked a prompt that speaks to them, and they're ready to write. What advice would you give them? What are some things to keep in mind?
Well, first of all, remember, there are no rules when it comes to journaling. This is your safe space to explore your thoughts and feelings. Don't worry about grammar or punctuation or even making sense. Just let the words flow.
Like having a conversation with yourself on paper.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And those conversations can be messy. Sometimes that's where the real breakthroughs happen. As you're writing, pay attention to what comes up, what memories pop into your head, what emotions bubble to the surface, what insights or realizations come to you. Don't hold back. Let it all out.
It's like you're digging deeper into yourself, uncovering things you might not have even known were there.
That's a great way to put it. And sometimes the most powerful moments happen when you least expect them. You might start writing about one thing and end up somewhere totally different. That's what's so cool about journaling. It lets you follow those threads wherever they go.
Like you're exploring a map of your heart, discovering new paths.
Exactly. And it's okay to take detours. If a prompt feels overwhelming or you get stuck, don't be afraid to switch things up. Try a different prompt or take a break and come back later. Just listen to your gut and go at your own pace.
It's so easy to put pressure on ourselves to have some big revelation every time we journal. But healing doesn't always work that way. It's a process, and it takes time.
You're right. Sometimes the most meaningful insights come from those quiet, simple moments of reflection. Maybe it's a small realization about yourself or your relationship with your loved one, or maybe it's a feeling of peace or acceptance.
And those moments might not happen right away. It can take weeks or even months of journaling.
Mm.
But if you're patient and trust the process, I really believe that journaling can be incredibly powerful.
Absolutely. And as you keep going, you might even find that journaling becomes a ritual, a space where you can connect with yourself, process your emotions, and find comfort.
Yeah, like a companion on your grief journey.
And even though grief will always be a part of your story, journaling can help you change the ending. It can help you move forward with hope and a sense of possibility.
I love that. So as we wrap up this deep dive into grief and journaling, I want to leave you with this. Don't underestimate the power of your own words. The stories you tell yourself, the memories you hold on to, and the dreams you have for the future. They can all shape your experience of grief and healing. So grab your journal, choose a prompt, and start writing. You might be surprised at what you discover. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into grief. It's been a really powerful conversation. And remember, you're not alone on this journey. Take care, everyone.